Hello everyone and welcome back to I Hope You're Weird. In today's episode we're going to be listening to stories from Ireland. So if you like what you hear, please do give it a thumbs up as it really helps my small channel to grow. And now without further ado, I am a 35-year-old female and my story takes place when I was 15, but it feels like yesterday. It was the day that would change my innocent youth forever. I am from a little village in Ireland with a population of a few hundred. The nearest town is about 10 miles away. Growing up in rural Ireland was very idealistic. Summers were spent playing football with neighbors or going to the lake swimming till the sun went down. I was lucky that even though the population is so small and the houses are far apart, my best friend's house was only down the road. So during those summer months, Mary and I were inseparable. My friend and I grew up with lots of brothers and sisters in a safe village. We were given a lot of freedom, and sometimes we were gone all day and only came back before dark. As it was the mid-90s, we had no mobiles, but our mums knew we would be okay and look out for each other. One thing we liked to do during these summers, besides going to the lake and hanging out at each other's houses, was to go to town and look around the shops. The easiest way to get to town was to hitchhike, as there was no buses. Here in Ireland we call it thumbing. Hardly anyone hitches now, because most households have 2 cars and parents are a lot more proactive. But back in the 80s and 90s it was very common. Our parents were okay with it, but there were certain rules we had to follow. I am not entirely sure who came up with the rules, but I assume our parents did. Rule number 1: never hitch alone. You must thumb with at least 1 or 2 friends. Number 2: never take a lift if there are 2 or more men in the car, but 2 or more women is fine. Number 3: never take a lift from someone in a van. There could be more guys hiding in the back, or worse, ropes, blindfolds, etc. Number 4: this was the most important rule. When a car stops to pick you up, always ask the driver where they are going first. If you tell them where you are going first, they could pretend they are going to the same place to lure you in. We were innocent, but had common sense, so we followed the rules down to a T. At least we tried to. My friend Mary and I used to hitch once a week during the summer. We would go to town with a population of a few thousand and look around the shops, eat ice cream and hang out. When we got a ride, we had to make small talk with the driver, and as 2 shy 15-year-olds, this bit sucked the most. To make it fair, we took turns sitting in the front and did most of the talking. One day, we spent a few hours in town. It was pretty uneventful, so we decided to thumb back. At around 3 p.m., we went to the usual spot to hitch from, just on the outskirts of the town. We were only waiting about 5 minutes when a white car pulled up. Before we could ask where he was going, he asked us first. My friend told him, and he said he was passing through our village on the way to another one. Rule number 4 broken. But he seemed nice enough, and we just wanted to go home. It was my turn to sit in the front. The driver introduced himself as John, a farmer, and was super friendly. He was dressed in a worn t-shirt with holes in it. He had tattered pants and smelled of cow shit. The car was full of bits of straw and was old and battered like the driver. He was about 60, had no wedding ring on. Don't ask me why, but I always noticed these things. About halfway between town and our home village, he asked if we heard a noise. No, we replied.
There it is again. Sounds like a banging noise,
He said. I didn't hear anything, so I just sat there quietly.
I think it might be the exhaust pipe.
He said.
I'll have to pull in and have a look.
He pulled up on a busy road and went out to take a look.
I didn't hear anything,
said Mary.
He seems like a weirdo.
I said. Call it intuition, but even though he was super friendly and chatty, I got a bad feeling from him. Next thing, he comes back to the driver's side and tells us that the exhaust is hanging down and was hitting off the road. He needs us to help him tie it up. It was then I noticed he had string holding up his pants instead of a belt. I thought this was odd. Anyway, he got some string off the boot, same color string as his belt, and we both got out of the car. Although I got a bad vibe from him, I didn't feel scared at this stage. We were on a busy road, and it was only about 3:30 p.m., so we both got out of the car. He showed us the exhaust pipe hanging down and used the rag to hold it up because it was hot. My friend Mary took over holding it up while he secured it with string. They were both kneeling while I just stood back and watched. It was then I noticed his fly was open and I could see his privates. He was clearly not wearing any underwear. He didn't even have a belt on, so I guess I wasn't surprised. In my head I thought, oh fuck, what is going on? Oh shit. But I said nothing. I just stood there in shock. Mary hadn't noticed at this stage and just continued to hold the pipe. When John was standing up, he noticed his fly was open and acted all shocked.
Oh, girls, I'm so sorry and embarrassed. I only have a safety pin holding the fly together, and it must have come off. Please forgive me and get back into the car.
Mary was stunned because she got a close-up of his privates, which left me to do the talking. I told him it was okay and that it was an accident, so we got back in the car. He fastened the safety pin, even though I didn't see him look for it. All was hidden again. Back in the car, the atmosphere was very different. We both felt mortified, and he kept apologizing over and over. I looked out of the passenger window and repeated,
It's okay, it's okay.
Then he said something that turned my stomach.
Well, girls, you are taking it very well. If I didn't know any better, I'd swear you liked it.
Then he nudged me in the arm with his arm, like you would do a friend. I looked at him through the corner of my eye, my face still facing the window, when I noticed his fly was undone again and he was exposed again. He must have noticed me looking, because he said,
Oh, sorry, the safety pin keeps opening. Just don't look.
Fine by me, I thought, but I said, okay, and continued to look out the window. He kept nudging me and saying,
Don't be looking. Don't be looking.
Giggling at the same time. He was doing this in a playful way, like it was a joke. Mary started giggling too, because when she is nervous, she laughs. I knew it wasn't her fault, but I was getting angry at this stage. He wouldn't stop telling me to stop looking. Then he said,
Your friend is laughing. She must be enjoying the view.
This made her laugh even harder. Now remember, we are both polite 15-year-olds that always respect our elders and are a little shy, so I would never speak up to an adult. The nudging in my arm and my friend laughing was all getting too much. He asked, was it the first Willy I have seen? And told me once again to stop looking. I was turned facing the passenger window, so much so that I had my back to him. There is no way I could be looking. I lost my temper. I shouted at the top of my voice.
I'm not fucking looking. Mary, shut up and laughing.
Silence followed. He said sorry, he was only joking, and I didn't need to be so serious. I said nothing and sat there, red with temper. I should have told him to let us out. I should have told him to cover himself up, the dirty old perv. But I was in shock too, and part of me wanted to believe it was all an innocent mistake. We finally arrived at our tiny, safe little village. We got out, and he said again that he was sorry about the whole thing. My friend got her voice back and assured him it was okay. I said it was all okay and not to worry about it. I said thanks for the lift. What he said back sickened me. He looked me up and down with his creepy smile and said,
Girlies, thanks for everything.
And drove off. We were left speechless. We sat down on a nearby bench to process all of this before going home. We made a deal. We wouldn't tell our parents, or they'd never let us hitchhike again. My friend got back her voice and repeated,
Pervert, sicko, smelly bastard. He had this plan the whole time.
over and over. About 5 minutes after sitting down on the bench, who drives by going the direction we just came from? Only pervert Farmer John, waving and smiling, while we sat stunned. He had beeped to catch our attention, so much for passing through our village. A few months later, and the ordeal went to the back of my mind. Occasionally, we would talk about Farmer John, but we made jokes about it, and we told some of our friends about what happened. One day, I told a friend of mine named Brit. A cousin of hers had told her a very similar story. The cousin lived in another village about 20 miles the other direction from town. She was a few years older than us. While hitchhiking home one day, the same thing happened to her and her friend. The exhaust, the safety pin, and the undone fly. It was no accident, and my worst fears were confirmed. Farmer John really was pervert John. So, to the man that smells like cow shit, has worn clothes and uses string to hold up his pants, and to the man who gets off on exposing himself to young girls, let's not meet again. Long-time lurker here, been trying to think of any encounters with creepy individuals for a while, and a memory has come to me at last, so hey, might as well post. This happened when I was around 12, while traveling a stretch of road between a large Irish town and a not so large Irish town with my mother and niece, 11 at the time. My niece and I were buckled up in the back. My mother was driving, and aside from the fact that the weather was eerie as hell, densely foggy, with that almost gaseous drizzle you get sometimes, nothing untoward had occurred. So about 3/4 of the way to this town, still driving in dense fog, we see roadwork signs ahead, meaning all traffic had to squeeze through a gap not much wider than a car on one side of the road. As we approach this gap, my mother practically slams on the brakes. This figure, completely out of nowhere, had staggered out of the fog onto the main road and just stood there directly in line with the gap. We could see it was a woman now. Let's pretend her name was Jane to make this easier to type. Wanders forward towards the car, looking awfully disoriented. Now bear in mind, this is a mother and two young enough teens, so she's obviously a bit sketchy about this individual blocking the road and approaching her in a fairly isolated area in dense fog. So Jane wanders around to the side door across from my mother and pulls it open, and I do believe my mother would have locked it beforehand or kept driving had she expected the woman to do this. But it was just such a sudden movement that none of us really could have predicted it. So Jane sits into the car, this kind of faraway look in her eye, wearing a fluorescent red rain jacket, and places this plastic bag awkwardly onto the floor. My niece and I are exchanging glances, and I recall my mother politely but firmly asking her to get out of the car, please. So Jane closes the door and refuses, and I recall her saying something like,
"No, you have to take me into town."
as though it were an obvious fact that she was surprised we weren't aware of. So my mother berates her mildly about wandering out in front of traffic, stating that you'd have to be mad to do so in this weather. And Jane responds with, and I quote,
"I know."
"Not sorry, nothing normal, just agreed." So we weren't far from town, and my mother decides to drive on. We'll drop Jane off and we'll be fine. So we're driving off, and my mother is again cautiously questioning Jane about what she thought she was doing, with Jane just continually insisting in this blank, monotone voice,
"No, you have to take me into town."
all the while staring blankly out into the fog. My niece and I are obviously a bit spooked, unsure if you all know that feeling where someone is just giving off creepy vibes. Like you can't put your finger on it, but something is definitely wrong here. So my mother glances back briefly, checking if we were fine, and we sheepishly confirmed as much. But no sooner have we spoken than Jane whips her head around wildly, as if something's bitten her. I kid you not, it looked like she genuinely hadn't even noticed we were in the back seat. Might as well have just been Jane and my mother for all she was concerned. She spent a good 5 to 10 seconds eyeing my niece before staring directly at me for at least as long, fingers grasping her plastic bag, the contents of which I'll never know, her eyes boring into mine with this genuinely uncomprehending look on her face, as though I had suddenly sprouted wings or told her she was on Saturn or something. So she slowly, eyes not leaving me, till her head was fully around, turned back to her listless stare out the front window, and the drive continues as normal, none of us opting to further continue a conversation with her. We're approaching the town in question, in which we don't live, I might add. We take a turn just before the bridge into the town. My mother explains calmly to Jane that we're dropping her at the bridge and she can walk in. It's literally 2 minutes into the center of the town from this bridge, but Jane is furiously shaking her head.
"No, no, you can't drop me here."
Again, it's that tone as though we're idiots, and it's blatantly obvious we couldn't possibly drop her here. My mother asks why, and in her faraway tone receives,
"You're just going to have to drop me into town."
I'll mention it wasn't as though she was being rude with these statements, not intentionally anyway. She just sounded genuinely confused that we were questioning her command to drop her into town. It sounded like she thought we had missed some serious reason as to why we just had to drop her straight in, and she couldn't figure out why. Anyway, rather than arguing, likely uselessly, with Jane, my mother crosses the bridge, drives into the square, and lets Jane go. After a few awkward seconds of Jane glancing around, she grasps her bag against her, pulls the door open, gives me and my niece one final confused eyeballing session, and stumbles out. It's raining heavy now, but of course Jane doesn't put the hood of her raincoat up. She just wanders almost aimlessly off. Car door still hanging open. No explanation, no thank you, no voiced goodbye. Just gone. Now, some of you are likely going to comment that Jane probably had some issues with her mental health, and that's entirely likely. But I'd just like to reaffirm the gut feeling of wrong permeating from this woman. It felt as though she really shouldn't have been there, wandering that lonely road in the late winter evening. And after a brief three-way debate on the woman after her departure, I'll admit it was a cold, uncomfortable and still faintly eerie ride home, the last few dozen miles in the fog. I know not what brought Jane to that patch of road, miles from anywhere that evening. If she was mentally capable of being out by herself, what put her in such a lost and confused state of mind? If she was indeed in need of help, what or who had landed this clearly confused woman in the middle of nowhere? These questions I nor you shall never know the answer to, but I can say for a certainty Jane is likely still out there, and I just hope to hell that I or mine don't pick her up again. A couple months back, I was up late playing video games. It was about 3:30 a.m. I had been playing for several hours at that point and started to feel restless from sitting for so long, so I decided I'd go for a walk. I live just outside of a relatively small and quiet town in Ireland, and being a grown-ass man in my 20s, I figured I didn't have any reason to fear being out for a walk this late at night, and have done so plenty of times in the past. I put on my jacket, grabbed my headphones, and started out on my usual path, following the road outside of my house and onto a bypass on the edge of town. The air was crisp and refreshing. The road lit well from the streetlights, and it seemed like it was going to be a pleasant walk. The bypass has a footpath on one side that's on a sort of a hill, so it's slightly elevated from the road. Hugging the footpath is a small wooded area that's near pitch black at night. I was looking down at my phone, contemplating what song I wanted to play next, when I noticed legs of a person whom I almost walked into. I was caught off guard, since just moments ago I had been looking ahead of me and hadn't seen anyone at all. I glanced up to see an older man in a brown coat. He looked to be in his 70s and was a bit shorter than me, with an unreadable expression on his face. He says something which I barely hear through my headphones, but I thought I heard him say something like, "Doggy." Assuming this man was simply out looking for a lost pet, I took off my headphones and said,
I haven't seen any dogs, sorry.
He then repeats what he said. His voice was high-pitched, with a strong accent, and I still couldn't make out what he was saying, despite now lacking my headphones, but the final word became more clear. Daddy. I asked him to repeat himself, turning my ear to him and leaning in slightly closer to hear him better. It was only now I had noticed a strong petrol smell coming off of him. He breathed in sharply and spoke again. This time I was able to make out what he was saying.
Are you my daddy?
I didn't know how to react to that. Part of me saw some humor in the scenario. I'm a third his age, and he's asking if I'm his dad. The other part of me was a mixture of confused and uneasy. After a moment of confused silence, I said,
No, do you need help finding someone?
I really wanted to just keep walking, but what if this clearly disoriented old man genuinely needed help? After another sharp inhale, he says,
Where's my daddy?
still uneasy about this whole thing. I tell him I don't know and ask where he last seen whoever it is he was searching for. He pauses for a second, then points into the dark wooded area. I looked over where he was pointing, but it was far too dark to see anything. I start to think about how to proceed with this situation when I noticed his face turn into a scowl as he grumbled something, and he reaches into his pocket and takes out what looked like some wet, rolled up fabric. Upon closer inspection, however, I realized it was actually a small dead bird. He looks at it, grumbled again, then looks back at me. I was trying to decide if I should call someone or just go. All I knew was that I wasn't equipped to deal with this. I looked down to my phone, then a noise like a large twig breaking happens to my right in the wooded area, followed by a very distinct and human shushing noise. Shh. Every alarm in my body is going off now. I quickly say,
I don't think I can help you.
and start walking fast toward the town, which turned into a full-on sprint when I hear footsteps emerging from the trees behind me. As I reach the crossing, I glance back to see a hefty, bald man guiding the older guy into the trees while staring over at me. The beam of a torch now piercing out from the wooded area, I cut through town and ran back home. Looking back, it's hard to say if I was in any actual danger or if I just stumbled upon a mentally ill old guy who had got out of his house. I checked the news for a couple days afterwards to see if there was anything on a missing elder in my town, but came up with nothing. Haven't seen him since or heard anyone I know mention anything about a creepy old guy. Anyways, thanks for letting me share my weird encounter. If any of you are interested, I can go back to the bypass I was on and take some pictures of it so you can see where it actually happened. Edit. So I went back down to take some pictures to show you guys the bypass. These pictures were taken less than an hour ago, so around 3:30 here in Ireland, which was close to the time frame that I was out at when I encountered a creepy old man. Just a little background check. I'm a female and was 12 when this all started, and I lived in a very calm part of my estate in Ireland. My mom is involved too, but not as much as I am. So on to the story now. It was 12 a.m. and had just turned Christmas Day when we got a knock on our door. I was taught not to open the door to strangers, especially when it's 12 a.m., so I just ignored it and hoped that whoever it was would just go away. About 3 minutes later, I heard another knock, but this time it was like a huge bang at the door. I was terrified and didn't know what to do, so by instinct I went and got my mum to answer. When she answered, this drunk Romanian guy who had a very scruffy beard and was wearing a white hoodie was just standing there and asked,
Can I walk your dog? I have my dog with me, so she'll be fine.
and my mum of course said no. I was a bit away from the door, but that's all I heard him say. My mum kept politely asking for him to go away, and when she had enough, she closed the door. The next morning, I was sitting having my breakfast, and my mum brings up the incident to my dad. So me being me, I started eavesdropping and took off one of my headphones.
I was really scared, because that's the guy who stalks me in the bushes. I welcome money.
When she said that, my heart sank so deep into my chest that it started to hurt. So you'd think that's the end of it? No, it wasn't. Fast forward 3 years, and I'm home alone, watching TV upstairs in my room, when I just had this sudden urge to look outside my window. And let me tell you, I was terrified. The same man was standing in my empty driveway, looking up into my bedroom. I got so freaked out and without hesitation immediately closed my curtains over. No more than 10 seconds later, there was a huge bang at my front door, and I hear the handle being played with. I was fucking paralyzed. When he finally stopped with the door handle, I heard the windows downstairs shatter into shards, and I heard him climb in. I sprinted into my bathroom and locked the door behind me, bringing my phone with me. I hear really fast thumps go up the stairs and hear my bedroom door open, and once he realizes I'm not there, he immediately goes for the bathroom door handle. He starts trying to kick the door down and was screaming that he would rape and kill me. I call 999, and within 5 minutes I hear,
Put your hands up. Do it now.
I was so fucking terrified that it took me almost 30 minutes to get out of the bathroom. The officer told me that he had a backpack, and in there they found dildos, condoms, a rope, a gag, bleach, and a meat cleaver. Also, I want to add that if the officer had arrived 5 minutes later, then I don't know what would have happened to me, as within 5 kicks he would have kicked the door down, and I don't want to know what would have happened to me if he did get in. This was a truly horrifying experience.